All right, I'm just going to read a little from this article, December 12, 2022. Idaho murder victims' hands bagged at the scene preserve possible evidence. And basically, they really wanted to make sure they preserve these hands of the victims. They were supposedly sleeping, even though they have defensive wounds. So forensic experts say it's possible the 4 victims' hands may contain evidence such as skin or hair or under their fingernails and could provide major clues regarding the suspect's identity. Their hands may also have touched DNA if they made physical contact with the killer or killers. But, that evidence doesn't exist now in hindsight. But, the idea was there, and it sounded like a brilliant idea at the time, and everybody thought, considering it was such a gruesome crime and it was a stabbing, and they fought back, that there was no possible way that the victim's hands wouldn't contain something of the perpetrator. This is good crime scene protocol, which is also, they can say that if they did this right, then more than likely everything else was done right too, which should allay some of the concerns from people, said a John Jay College of Criminal Justice professor and a retired NYPD sergeant. So clearly people were upset about the way the investigation was going at this point on December 13th, 2022. Little did they know, somebody was already in their crosshairs, most likely, and they were trying to assuage people's worry by saying, well, these hands that they bagged of the victims will most likely contain something. We're going to get a hit eventually on something from the victims. Then they say, and then we would be trying to develop DNA profiles from those surfaces. In the case of latent prints, he explained, we might be working in a room or a car or something of that nature to be able to develop latent prints or fingerprints from a person that are visible to the naked eye. And then we would be looking to either compare those to known individuals, or we would be looking to put them in a database to see if we can identify someone. Investigators do some testing at crime scenes before they collect and transport evidence to a police department's evidence room and then the forensic labs. Well, that's not exactly what happened in this, but okay. When you have an up-close attack like this, the chances are good the victim scraped at the face of the arms of the assailant or they tried to defend themselves. So this is an awesome development, he told Fox News Digital. Idaho State Police Forensic Services Laboratory Systems Director Matthew Garnett told Fox News, DNA can be found in any kind of cellular material. In crime scenes, investigators try to determine whether someone touched a surface or handled the surface or whether they've left blood, saliva, any kind of bodily fluids, and then identify areas where there might be tissue or touch DNA. I find that interesting that they put that in there because there was no blood or saliva, and all they were left with was this supposed touch DNA that they're not thrilled to turn over how they got it. And that's what Ann Taylor wants to know. Generally, what we're looking to do is first identify a potential suspect or suspects, potential perpetrators of a crime. If there are not any, Garnett said, there may be some already identified. And if that's the case, then we'll ask the officers to collect items from them that can be used to either match to their samples from the scene or to eliminate them as potential contributors of things like fingerprints and DNA. Funny, because that just sounds like exactly what happened here, that, we didn't match anything, but we grabbed a sample, and now we can't tell you how we got the sample and what we did with it for the IGG. If investigators were able to find DNA from the crime scene, which is not always a given depending on the complexity of the crime scene, police can run that information against the Idaho State DNA database as well as the state fingerprint database and national databases in an effort to try to identify a potential perpetrator, the DNA analysis expert said. Well, they did run those through your Idaho databases and came up with garbage. The entire process can take days in some of the shortest homicide cases and up to weeks, depending on the complexity of the crime scene and whether it contains mixed DNA. Well, in this case, it definitely did, because where the knife sheath was found. And apparently, as I read in an article before about in a January one, it said in the 6-week-long investigation, police received over 19,000 tips, traveled humongous amounts of distance across the country, and scanned thousands of DNA samples to nab the suspect. Okay, how is that possible if you're only telling Ann Taylor you only tested 3 other unknown male DNA samples? Where are these thousands of scanned samples then? Additionally, everything a scientist does at the laboratory has to be reviewed by a second scientist to make sure that they arrive at the same conclusions that the first scientist arrived that they look at, Garnett said. Or you all arrive at the same ones that you can't get anything off the sample, so you send it to a lab and then tell another scientist at the defense attorney that they can't actually duplicate it because they're not going to tell you how they did it. And you're going to have to fight in court for discovery for the next few months and drag your feet, but okay. The scene is not a cut and dry case with DNA due to the fact that the home where the other victims were killed, a college rental just steps off campus, probably had lots of mixtures of DNA. Well, no kidding. If you found DNA specifically on body or blood droplets in the crime scene, then you can look to get a DNA exemplar. The retired sergeant said the police department has its work cut out for it to try to get a DNA exemplar. Yeah. Well, all right then.